I'm just as broke and hungry as any gambler can be.
Welcome back to The Place of Places, a chapter-by-chapter analysis of William Saroyan's 1972 memoir, Places Where I've Done Time. Today, we lose a little bit of money at Breen's, 3rd Street, San Francisco, 1928. Breen's saloon loomed large in Saroyan's early writing years. It was a bar and restaurant in the Soma, or South of Market district, of San Francisco, which was and always has been one of the sketchier neighborhoods in the city, next to Skid Row. In this chapter, Saroyan takes a lunch break at Breen's from his job at the Postal Telegraph Office in the Palace Hotel on Market. We talked about that place in Chapter 8. He passes the SF Examiner building on Jesse, that was a newspaper, and finds himself between Market and Mission at Breen's. It was during Prohibition, so Breen served the kind of beer that was permitted, as well as strong bitters that could be combined with other drinks to create something considered intoxicating or at any rate halfway pleasant. Breen's also had a cafeteria-style restaurant that served simple German fare. During Prohibition, the bitters were 35 cents a pop and could run up to 68% alcohol, all legal under the umbrella of medicine for digestion and appetite stimulant. Saroyan mentions that no women entered the bar save for a few nuns asking for money from the owners, Bill and Bob Breen. Bob was the responsible party. Bill was the one who had been a death-defying alcoholic and had been rescued by his brother, with the help of the church. He tells us that they were only kind if you had money. Saroyan would roll 26 with Bill Breen, who sold cigars and cigarettes and kept score. 26 was a dice game. Saroyan wrote, "The next stiff is another stiff, as we used to be told when we rolled out the 10 dice at a game called 26, and not one of the selected numbers, our number, had showed its face. If you were wise, you took 6, because out of 10 dice there was always bound to be at least one 6, sometimes 2, which you needed as an average for each of the 10 rolls of the game, so that you would have the required 26 for the 3-1 win. I always bet a quarter, and if I won, got back 75 cents. God help us, it was a crazy aspiration, and I had a lot of time in the years when other newcomers were going to college. I rolled 26, and either Bill or Jim Breen at Breen's on 3rd Street in San Francisco used to call out the number after each roll, and jot it down on a long sheet of lined and cross-lined paper on a table. 1, 2, 1, stiff, stiff, and another stiff." 26 was invented in Chicago during the Depression, and typically women, sometimes also prostitutes, were hired to call the numbers. Of course, Breen's expressly forbade women, or at least spread the word they weren't welcome, so one of the Breen brothers called the numbers. Not quite the same allure to keep a man playing, but they made their choice. When Saroyan loses all his money at 26, he explains, "I have never been able to ask anybody for money, but on this occasion, desperate and angry not so much at my bad luck as at my having been hypnotized by the foolish game, and having felt that I would win, this has been my story, so to put it, in all of the gambling I have done, that I could win and that I would win." Despite Saroyan's hints that he couldn't afford a car ride home, Breen stared icily into the distance and offered no assistance. So Saroyan would go in the back to the rummy tables, where it didn't cost anything to play, and tried to make a few coins that way. Or he would walk the 5 miles home, or move on and try to make some money at the Kentucky or the Barrel House nearby, facing Opera Alley, where he bet on horses. He would hawk his fountain pen and portable typewriter at pawn shops repeatedly to get a little money to gamble, then buy them back until he didn't win and couldn't buy them back. Breen's was another of the many foolish places I went to instead of college. Was it just as well? It was better, I believe, but wouldn't ask anybody else to try it. He also mentions Breen's by name in his story Little Caruso, which has a fascinating history and which you can read more about in an article on our website. Examiner journalist Will Stevens immortalized Breen's in his 1962 book, 3 Street. This is the name that newspapermen used for it, 3 Street. And Herb Caen, famed Chronicle journalist and friend to Saroyan, described it in 1949, "You'll find bums and businessmen, newspapermen, and socialites." Breen's at 71 3rd Street opened around 1924 and closed in 1979. It was previously in other locations and totaled 70 years of business. Bill Breen died at age 71 in 1949 and was considered one of the last of San Francisco's old-time saloon keepers. The son of Irish immigrants, he was born in the Mission District in San Francisco in the 1880s and opened his first saloon before the 1906 fire. During Prohibition, Breen served 0.5% beer and weathered the storm, attracting the white-collar workers of the SF Examiner and the SF Call Bulletin newspaper, brokers and bankers, as well as the blue-collar longshoremen and truck drivers and the denizens of Skid Row. His brother, however, was John, not Bob or Jim. John died in 1959, having sold the restaurant in 1952. In fact, Bill was the businessman, and John the alleged drunk. Here again we see artistic license or memory failure of Saroyan. There was actually a Bob Breen in Saroyan's life, but he was a theater man, the head of the American National Theater and Academy, originally federally funded by the Works Progress Administration. He and Saroyan interacted around 1940, long after Saroyan lurked along 3rd Street. In 1979, the San Francisco Redevelopment Agency bought the Breen's building and others nearby with the intention of tearing them down and building high-rises in their place. Many in the city tried to save Breen's and rescue it under the banner of historic preservation, but their efforts failed. Today, it's a hummus restaurant with a parking garage on top. The hummus is good, maybe not historic. Breen's was spiritually connected to another bar on 3rd Street, Jerry and Johnny's, started in 1935 by Jerry Hansen after working at Breen's for 12 years. That location closed in 1985, also part of redevelopment. The bar in Breen's was the longest uncurved bar in San Francisco, with reports ranging from 54 inches to 72 inches, and was shipped around Cape Horn in 1850. It was purchased in 1980 at auction by Jay Emmerich of Chicago's Jays on Rush bar for $65,000. This chapter is meant to illustrate those early days in San Francisco, what it was like to be a young man in the middle of the Depression. Saroyan gambled on horses and cards for decades, and places like Opera Alley and Breen's are where he built those vices, along with all the other men trying to make a buck in hard times. Saroyan lived with his upstanding family, and to some extent had a safety net for when he fell on his face gambling. This was the luxury of being so young. Of course, those vices became more problematic as he aged and ventured out on his own with his own money, sometimes too much for him to know what to do with other than gamble. But as he says, Breen's was an education, and for the writing that he was doing, modernist and realist at the time, it was where he would find many of his characters. He didn't have the padded life of a college boy, but he did have some leeway to make mistakes and learn how to be in the world without being forced to live on the streets. Although The Time of Your Life was based on Izzy's Bar on Pacific Avenue, Breen's might have played an influence too, with its disparate clientele and its swinging front doors. Saroyan's formative years matched up neatly with some of those most nostalgic of San Francisco's, after the growing pains of the gold rush and before World War II's population and economic boom in the Bay Area. His stories contributed to the building of San Francisco as a noir icon, with its mysterious fog and seedy gambling dens and alleyways. All this contemporaneously with Dashiell Hammett's Maltese Falcon. All things considered, Breen's was a pretty safe place, and legit, not even participating in bootlegging. It was a good place to get an education, and it no doubt helped rocket Saroyan to stardom in 1934. And for that, it held a significant place in Saroyan's head. Let's put this on the Saroyan map and move on.